Buy 2 pigs, get a Apache slave for free. But Cowboy washed her and revealed her true beauty. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
The freight yard behind Dry Creek Junction sat under the late afternoon sun, its boards dry from weeks without rain. The fences leaned slightly from years of use, and the dust carried a bitter smell that mixed with the noise of pigs, horses, and men moving through the space. William Carter rode in at a slow, controlled pace, guiding his horse as someone who preferred not to draw attention. He tied the reins to a low rail and stepped down, keeping his shoulders relaxed and his expression unreadable. William had lived alone for nearly 8 years on a ranch several miles from town. He spent his days repairing fences, tending cattle, and avoiding anything that could pull him back into old arguments with people he no longer spoke to. His decision to leave his family homestead years earlier had settled deep inside him, shaping him into a man who stayed cautious around strangers. He came into town only when supplies ran too low to ignore, and today he needed 2 pigs to replace the ones lost during a winter illness. The livestock trader, a tired-looking man with a cracked voice, stood beside the pen where the pigs rooted in straw. He addressed the crowd with a tone that suggested he enjoyed cheap entertainment more than honest work. $3 for both, he shouted. And hell, I'll sweeten it. By the pigs, take the Apache girl too. Murmurs rippled through the men gathered nearby. Some chuckled. Others tilted their heads to get a better view of the woman chained behind the pen. She stood barefoot on cold dirt, her ankles stiff from hours without movement. She wore torn cloth barely holding together, and her hair had become a heavy mess from days of neglect. Her body trembled in small, strained movements as she tried to stay upright. Her name was Naya, though no one there knew it. Months earlier, she had been captured during a raid and eventually traded between men who used her status as a way to make quick money. She had stopped talking after the second time she was dragged through an unfamiliar settlement, believing that silence kept her alive longer. She had learned to watch faces instead of words, searching for any sign of safety. When she heard laughter at her expense, her stomach tightened. She kept her eyes fixed on the ground to avoid provoking anyone. Her throat felt dry, and she braced for another long night chained in the yard. William approached the pen quietly. He didn't look directly at the men or react to their jokes. His attention shifted between the pigs, the trader, and finally the young woman behind the post. His eyes paused on her hands. The rope marks around her wrists were darkened from dried blood. He noticed the slow, tense rise of her chest as she tried to steady her breathing. The trader smirked when William came close. "Carter, you're in luck. I'm practically giving her away. Eats nothing, works slow, causes trouble only when breathing. Take her and save me the headache." William didn't respond to the tone. He kept his voice as even as possible. $3 for the pigs. That's the price. And she's free, the trader reiterated, expecting a reaction. William reached into his coat, pulled out the coins, and placed them into the trader's hand. His fingers didn't shake. His face didn't change. He simply said, "Cut her loose." The men fell quiet at the blunt request. A few of them exchanged confused looks, unsure whether he was serious. William didn't move until the trader finally shrugged and stepped toward the girl. The trader jerked at the knot holding her wrists. The rope snapped free, and the chain clattered against the post. Released from the restraint, Naya staggered and nearly fell. William moved one step forward, ready to stop her from hitting the ground, but he kept enough distance not to frighten her. "Wagon," he said, nodding toward it. His voice was low and calm. Naya lifted her head slowly. She looked at him with quick, frightened glances, studying his expression for any sign of what he expected from her. She saw nothing familiar. No smirk, no impatience, no demand. She took a small step, then another, forcing her body to obey despite the weakness in her legs. The crowd watched silently now. Some seemed disappointed that the joke had turned into a real transaction. Others shook their heads, muttering under their breath. William ignored them all. He lifted the 2 pigs into the wagon crate and checked the latch. Naya sat on the wagon bed, pulling her knees close as though preparing for a sudden command to move elsewhere. Her wrists throbbed from the rope's pressure, and she tucked them out of sight. William took a folded wool blanket from under the seat and held it toward her. Cold on the ride. She hesitated. The last time a man offered something, it had ended badly. Her fingers twitched. After a few seconds, she reached out and took the blanket carefully, gripping it as if expecting it to be yanked away. William mounted his horse and led the wagon out of the yard. The sound of voices behind them faded as they followed the trail leading toward the open land outside town. The wagon wheels rolled through patches of dry grass, stirring light dust that settled quickly in the cool air. Naya stayed silent, but her mind worked constantly. She wondered why he hadn't tied her again. She wondered if he planned to bring her to someone else. She watched his back, noticing how he sat straight but without tension. His shoulders didn't carry the eagerness she expected from someone who saw her as property. She didn't trust the calm completely, but something about his steady movement lowered her fear enough for her breathing to even out. William kept the pace low. He wasn't sure what she was thinking, but he knew enough not to crowd her with questions. He had made the decision to take her from the yard because the thought of leaving her with those men sat wrong in his chest. He didn't fully understand why he reacted so quickly, but he accepted the weight of it now. He didn't intend to hurt her. He didn't intend to own her. He simply couldn't leave her there. When the ranch came into view, the sun hovered low across the hills. The buildings looked quiet, with only the faint outline of smoke rising from the morning fire that had long since died down. Naya's hands tightened on the blanket when she saw the property, unsure whether she was arriving at a safer place or another trap she couldn't predict. William dismounted and walked toward a small shed beside the cabin. Inside, a metal basin stood on a table. He had heated water earlier for cleaning his tools, and the warmth remained. He lit a lantern, placed it on a hook, and turned toward her. "You can wash here," he said, keeping his voice level and his posture steady. "I'll wait outside." Naya didn't move at first. She stared at the basin, then at him, trying to understand the purpose behind the offer. When no threat followed, she stepped inside slowly. William pulled the shed door almost closed, leaving a narrow opening for air and light. He leaned against the porch rail with his arms relaxed at his sides. He didn't try to listen. He only waited, giving her the first moment of privacy she had been offered in months. Inside the shed, Naya dipped her hands into the warm water. Her skin stung at the temperature change. Dirt lifted from her palms in dark streaks, revealing skin she barely remembered. For the first time in a long while, she felt something close to relief. Outside, William watched the quiet ranch settle into the last light of day. He didn't know her name. He didn't know how long she had been passed from group to group. He only knew that the sight of her chained in that yard had forced a decision he didn't regret. And inside the shed, Naya wondered if this man, silent, distant, unreadable, might be the first person in months who didn't see her as something to control. The last line of daylight faded behind the ridge as William carried a stack of dry wood toward the cabin. The air had cooled enough that each exhale left a faint trace in front of him. He set the wood beside the door, brushed the dust from his hands, and glanced toward the shed where Naya still washed. He didn't approach. He didn't call out. He gave her the time she needed, unsure how long it had been since she last had a moment free from watching eyes. Inside the shed, Naya rinsed the last traces of grime from her arms. The warm water felt strange now that her skin could breathe again. She had removed what remained of the filthy rag she arrived in and used the worn cloth William had left on the table to dry herself. Her hair, heavy with water, clung to her back. She felt her shoulders lower 1 degree at a time as a different kind of tiredness replaced the panic she carried from the yard. She saw a folded gray dress placed on a chair near the wall. It was simple, large enough to drape without restriction. She hesitated before reaching for it. She didn't know why he had left something clean for her. She didn't know if wearing it meant she owed him anything. After several seconds, she slipped it on, feeling its coarse but intact fabric settle over her. Outside, William turned his head when he heard the shed door shift. Naya stepped out, her movement slow, Not from fear alone, but from uncertainty about how to behave in a place where she wasn't tied or shoved. Her wet hair hung straight down her back. Her hands stayed close to her sides, fingers curled lightly, as if prepared to shield herself at any sudden movement. William kept his voice calm. "You'll want the fire. Nights fall cold out here." She looked toward the cabin, then at him, unsure whether she was meant to follow. He stepped back to give her room and gestured toward the door. She walked with careful steps, watching him from the corner of her eye. Once inside, she paused. The cabin was small but warm. A low fire glowed in the stone hearth. Tools hung neatly on the wall. A table stood in the center of the room with a pot and tin plates stacked nearby. Everything looked lived in but orderly. She scanned the space quickly, searching for ropes, shackles, or signs of where she might be forced to sleep. She saw none. "I made stew earlier," William said as he ladled food into a tin bowl. "It's not much, but it's warm." She didn't approach the table. Hunger twisted in her stomach, but her body held still, waiting for instruction. William didn't rush her. He placed a bowl on the table and stepped away so she wouldn't feel cornered. After a long hesitation, she walked forward and sat at the far end of the bench. Her hands trembled as she lifted the spoon. The first bite made her close her eyes briefly. She didn't speak, but the tension in her jaw eased. William watched discreetly. He saw how she ate slowly, as if expecting the meal to vanish before she finished. He understood enough about fear to recognize that forcing conversation would make things worse. He sat across the room, near the fire, and removed his boots, letting his feet rest on the wooden floor. Only when she finished did she raise her head. Her voice came out low, not quite steady. "Why did you take me?" William looked at her directly for the first time since they entered the cabin. "Because leaving you there didn't sit right with me." She searched his face, expecting more explanation, but he offered none. She hadn't heard honesty spoken with that little effort in a long time. She didn't fully believe him yet, but she didn't sense deceit in his tone. "What do you expect from me?" she asked. "Nothing tonight," he answered quietly. "You're tired. You can rest here." She didn't hide the confusion on her face. Men who took women from yards like that usually had clear intentions. His absence of demand made her uneasy because it left her without a rule to follow. He stood and walked to the corner near the fire. He placed a folded blanket on the floor. "You'll sleep here. Warmest place in the cabin. I'll use the cot." Naya's heartbeat quickened. Most men insisted she sleep within reach. The idea that he would move himself instead of her didn't make sense. She tried to read his posture again. His shoulders were relaxed, his hands open, his voice steady. Nothing about him signaled a trap. "You don't need to fear me," he said, not as reassurance, but as a statement of fact. Fear, however, didn't disappear on command. She nodded once, not knowing what else to do. William stepped outside to bring him more wood. The night had grown colder, and his breath showed more clearly now. When he returned, Naya sat near the fire with the blanket wrapped around her legs. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the flames, absorbing the warmth as if reminding herself she was allowed to sit still. He closed the door softly. "If you want water, there's a bucket by the table." She lifted her chin slightly, acknowledging the information. She didn't speak again. For the next several minutes, the cabin remained quiet except for the crackle of burning wood. William worked on mending a broken latch at the table. Naya watched his movements without appearing to. She noticed the careful way he handled the tools. She noticed he never made sudden gestures. She noticed he kept enough distance that she wouldn't feel trapped. Small detail she had survived by studying now told her something she didn't know how to name. When he finished the latch, he said, "I'm turning in. If you need anything, say so." She didn't answer. She waited until he laid down on the cot across the room before letting her shoulders ease further. She pulled the blanket to her chest and lay on her side, facing the fire. Her mind stayed alert long after her body wanted to sleep. Each unfamiliar sound made her flinch lightly. She kept her eyes half open to watch for danger. Eventually, the steady rhythm of the fire and the quiet space allowed her breathing to settle. Across the room, William stared at the ceiling for a moment before closing his eyes. He hadn't planned on sharing his home with anyone. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew he had made the right choice today. For the first time in months, Naya fell asleep without expecting someone's hand on her wrist. And for the first time in years, William didn't feel the weight of isolation pressing so heavily against his chest. A faint gray light filtered through the cabin window when William opened his eyes. The fire had burned low during the night, leaving a gentle warmth in the room. He sat up slowly so he wouldn't startle Naya, who lay on the blanket near the hearth. She slept curled on her side, her breathing even and steady, her hair drying into long, straight strands across her shoulder. It was the first time he had seen her without the rigid tension she carried the day before. He stood quietly and added 2 pieces of wood to the fire. The crackle woke her. Her eyes opened quickly, alert and guarded, the calm of sleep replaced by a rush of confusion as she remembered where she was. She pushed herself up, ready to react if anything seemed off. "It's morning," William said, keeping his tone low and steady. "I'm making coffee. There's no rush." Naya glanced around the room, taking another inventory of her surroundings to confirm nothing had changed during the night. She noticed the tools still hanging where they had been, the table in the same place, the cabin door closed but unlocked. No ropes lay waiting. No chains sat in sight. Her muscles stayed tight, but she didn't move toward the corner of the room the way she used to when danger seemed close. She watched him pour water into a pot and place it on the stove. His movements remained slow and predictable, giving her time to observe each action without surprise. William poured cornmeal into a small tin bowl. "I'll make porridge," he said. "It isn't fancy, but it fills you." Naya didn't answer, but her breathing settled slightly. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and sat upright near the fire. Hunger tugged at her, though she didn't mention it. Speaking about needs had rarely brought anything except trouble in the past. William carried the pot to the table and stirred it gently. "If you're cold, the shed still has warm water left from last night. You can wash again if you want." She turned her eyes toward him, studying his posture for any hidden motive. She saw none. Still, she didn't move. Instead, she asked quietly, "What do you want from me?" The question hung in the air, heavy with everything she had endured. William leaned against the counter, hands resting loosely at his sides. "Nothing you're not ready to give," he said. "You can stay until you decide otherwise. I won't force anything on you." She absorbed the words slowly. She had learned that most men spoke one way and acted another. Trust was something she didn't know how to offer quickly, yet his answer didn't carry the edge she expected. She looked down at her wrists. The rope marks remained dark, but the pain had lessened. She rubbed them gently, surprised at the unfamiliar comfort of soft fabric instead of tight restraints. When the porridge finished cooking, William placed a bowl on the table. "Eat if you want. I'll step out and check the livestock." Naya hesitated. He was giving her space again. She understood that much. Yet being left alone in someone else's home triggered a new kind of panic. What if he locked her in? What if leaving meant she would lose the one warm place she had slept in months? William picked up his coat from the chair. "Door won't be locked," he added, sensing her fear without her speaking. "You can walk outside. You can look around. Just stay away from the far ridge. Coyotes come through there." She nodded once, a faint acknowledgement that she had heard him, though her eyes betrayed her confusion. No one had ever explained boundaries to her without threats attached. He stepped out into the cold morning air, leaving the door open a crack. Naya watched him through the gap as he crossed the yard and moved toward the small enclosure where the pigs rested. He checked the fence, lifted the latch, and ensured the animals were fed. His focus on the task looked genuine. No glances over his shoulder, no sign of waiting to catch her doing something wrong. Inside the cabin, she approached the table carefully. The steam rising from the bowl warmed her face. After a long moment of deliberation, she sat and took a cautious spoonful. The simple taste felt almost unfamiliar after weeks of poor meals offered with cruelty. When William returned, he wiped his hands on his coat and stepped inside. He noticed her eating, but didn't comment. Instead, he said, "I'm fixing a loose rail by the corral. If you stay near the cabin, you'll be safe." Naya stood, unsure whether she should follow him or stay put. Her heartbeat picked up again. She didn't know the rules here yet. "You don't have chores today," he added. "You can rest. Explore the yard if you want. You won't be punished for being outside." The statement hit her harder than he realized. Her throat tightened slightly. She turned her head away before her expression showed too much. William grabbed a hammer from a hook and walked toward the corral. Each strike of the hammer echoed across the yard. Naya stepped to the doorway and watched him work. His focus stayed on the rail, not on her. His presence didn't carry tension. The steady rhythm of his repairs created an unfamiliar quiet. After several minutes, she stepped outside. She kept the cabin behind her, walking slowly toward the edge of the yard where the ground flattened. She scanned the horizon, taking in a stretch of land without walls or guards. The distance frightened her and soothed her at the same time. She wrapped her arms around her torso and took a few deep breaths. William noticed her from a distance but didn't approach. He allowed her the room to decide how far she felt safe going. When she looked back, he returned her glance with a simple nod before going back to work. Naya realized then that his permission wasn't a trick. She could walk without being dragged back. She could stand without being shoved down. She could breathe without anticipating a blow. It wasn't trust yet, but it was the first morning in a long time that didn't begin with fear. By midday, she returned to the cabin on her own. William met her at the door, not with questions, but with a quiet, steady look. "You're welcome to help me gather kindling later," he said. "Only if you want." She didn't answer, but he saw a new steadiness in her posture. Something between them had shifted, quiet and small, yet unmistakably real. The afternoon sun settled high over the ranch, warming the dry ground and throwing long shadows against the worn boards of the cabin. William carried an empty sack toward the woodpile, his steps measured as he sorted through branches and logs that had been drying for weeks. He planned to gather enough kindling to last several days. The cold nights in this region arrived suddenly, and he preferred to be prepared. From the open cabin door, Naya watched him. She had finished eating the last of the porridge and folded the blanket neatly at the foot of the hearth. Every movement she made carried caution, as if she still expected to be reprimanded for existing in the wrong place. She hesitated before stepping out onto the porch. The sunlight touched her face, and she blinked against the brightness. William glanced up, noting her presence. He didn't call her over. He kept stacking wood into the sack with calm, steady motions. Naya approached slowly, stopping a few feet from him. Her hands fidgeted at her sides, unsure whether she was welcome to help. "I can carry small pieces," she said, her voice low but clear enough to be heard. William set the sack down, surprised she had spoken first. "If you want to," he replied. "Take from the left pile. Those are dry." She crouched beside the pile and picked up several sticks. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear alone, but from uncertainty about performing tasks without strict instruction. She had worked under orders for months, not choice. This was different. She placed the sticks carefully into the sack, making sure not to crowd his space. William noticed her careful attention. "You can stack them how you like," he said. "There's no wrong way." Her gaze flicked to him, trying to understand that freedom. She didn't answer, but her grip steadied. They worked in silence for several minutes. The only sounds came from wood shifting and the occasional soft breeze brushing across the yard. Naya's movements grew more confident as she adjusted to the task. For the first time since arriving, her shoulders weren't drawn tight against her body. When the sack was nearly full, William tied the top and lifted it onto his shoulder. "That should last us a while," he said. "I'll take it to the shed." Naya followed at a distance, observing the layout of the property. She hadn't taken a good look earlier. Her focus had been on safety and escape routes. Now she noticed the small corral to the right, a chicken coop partly repaired, and a water trough fed by a hand pump near the barn. The ranch was modest but well kept, showing signs of a man who worked alone and stayed organized. William set the sack in the corner of the woodshed. He turned back toward her, noting the curiosity in her eyes. "If you need water, pump's over there," he said, pointing toward the trough. "Cleanest place to draw from." She nodded once. It wasn't permission she needed to know the boundaries. He understood that. Curiosity pulled her toward the pump. She pressed the handle, surprised when cool water flowed into the metal basin below. She cupped her hands and drank slowly, savoring the temperature. She hadn't tasted clean water in days. A quiet relief settled in her chest. While she drank, William repaired a loose plank on the chicken coop. The hammering startled her at first, but he paused when he saw her flinch. "Just fixing the hinge," he said, lowering the tool. "Didn't mean to startle you." She exhaled, relieved he noticed instead of ignoring her reaction. "I'm not used to loud sounds," she admitted. "I figured," he replied. "I'll let you know before I start anything noisy." The simple consideration made her throat tighten. No one had adjusted their actions for her comfort since before she was taken from her home. She didn't thank him out loud, afraid gratitude might imply debt, but she held his gaze a few seconds longer than usual before turning back toward the cabin. As the day stretched on, she helped gather feathers from the yard, moving them into a small basket. She wasn't sure whether he needed them, but she wanted to contribute something. William watched from a distance, recognizing the subtle shift in her behavior. She wasn't just surviving. She was testing the possibility of belonging without danger. Later, he carried a bucket of feed to the pigs. Naya approached the pen cautiously, standing near the fence. The animals snorted and pushed against the rails, eager for food. She jumped back slightly, unfamiliar with their enthusiasm. William motioned for her to stay beside him. "They won't hurt you," he said. "They're just hungry." She nodded, studying the pigs with a mixture of caution and curiosity. The scent of feed drifted upward, and the grunting creatures pressed forward again. She stepped a little closer, reassured by William's calm posture. "You can help feed them tomorrow," he added. "Only if you want." Her attention shifted back to him. "I don't know much about ranch work." "You'll learn," he said without judgment. "No rush." The certainty in his tone eased a part of her that had been knotted for months. She wasn't expected to perform perfectly. She wasn't being measured against impossible standards. She was simply allowed to try. As the sun dipped lower, casting orange light across the yard, William finished sweeping the walkway. "You should rest inside before it gets cold," he said. "I'll join you once I'm done here." Naya stepped toward the cabin, pausing at the door. She looked back at him, studying the way he moved with purpose, but without the heavy aggression she had grown used to. She realized he had not raised his voice once, not even when giving direction. Inside the cabin, she sat near the fire again, wrapping the blanket around herself. Her mind replayed the events of the day. No threats, no shouting, no chains, only tasks offered, not demanded. Only space, not confinement. When William entered a few minutes later, he set his tools aside and removed his coat. The warmth of the fire filled the cabin with a steady glow. He glanced at her, then at the table where the basket of feathers sat. "You gathered those?" he asked. "Yes," she said softly. "Good," he replied. "We used them for stuffing the mattresses. I was running low." Her surprise must have shown, because his expression softened, though he didn't smile. "It helps," he said simply. For the first time since she had arrived, Naya felt a quiet sense of usefulness that didn't come from fear. It wasn't trust yet, but it was a step towards something she hadn't felt since her capture. A life where she could move without waiting for pain. By the next morning, clouds gathered over the valley with a heavy stillness that warned of incoming rain. The air carried a damp chill, and the ground looked darker than usual. William stepped outside first, scanning the sky with the instinct of someone who had learned to read weather long before he could explain it. A storm would hit before sundown. He needed to secure the animals and check the roof for loose boards. Inside the cabin, Naya folded the blanket and set it neatly on the bench. She listened to the wind push against the window and felt her stomach tighten. Storms had never meant safety in recent months. They had meant hiding, punishment, and long nights exposed to cold. Her mind drifted backward for a few seconds before she forced it away. William knocked gently on the open door frame so she wouldn't be startled. "Weather's turning," he said. "We have work to do." She looked up, uncertain whether we included her. He noticed the hesitation and added, "If you feel up to it." That slight clarification steadied her. She nodded and stepped outside, pulling the sleeves of the dress tighter around her arms. The wind caught her wet hair from the day before, lifting it gently before pushing it across her face. She brushed it aside and followed William toward the barn. The pigs need dry straw, William explained as he lifted a bale. Storm will spook them if they're left in the open. Naya watched how he handled the bale, bracing with his shoulder before dragging it across the dirt floor. His movements were strong but controlled, always deliberate. She stepped forward. I can help carry smaller pieces. He pulled apart a section of the bale and handed her a manageable bundle. She held it close, surprised by its rough texture but relieved to do something with her hands. Inside the barn, she spread the straw evenly, making sure no gaps remained. You're doing fine, William said, noticing her careful attention. She didn't look up, but the faint tension in her shoulders eased at the remark. Once the pigs were settled, William led her to the side of the barn where a section of roof had warped. I'll fix this, he said, but I need someone to hand me the nails. Stay on the ground, don't climb. She nodded. Heights had never frightened her, but she appreciated the boundary. She stood ready with the tin box of nails as he climbed the ladder. The wind grew stronger, rattling the boards as he hammered them into place. She kept her eyes on him, prepared to steady the ladder if needed. We climbed down, he exhaled slowly. That should hold. Naya closed the tin quietly. Storms used to mean hiding, she said without lifting her eyes. I never knew if I'd survive the night. William paused, surprised she had offered something so personal. Storms here just mean inconvenience, he said. Nothing more. She looked at him then, studying his expression to see whether he spoke casually or with intent. She realized he meant exactly what he said. The idea of a storm that wasn't tied to danger felt almost foreign. As they walked toward the cabin, thunder grumbled in the distance. William stopped by the woodpile and handed her several pieces for the hearth. We'll need extra heat once the rain starts. She carried them inside and arranged them near the firebox. Her hands moved with more confidence than the day before. She understood the rhythm of this place a little better now. How he moved, how tasks worked, how the environment responded. While she worked, William prepared a stew on the stove. He cut carrots, potatoes, and dried meat into the pot, adding water and salt. The scent filled the cabin gradually, mixing with the smell of burning wood. Naya sat by the table, watching the rain begin to strike the roof. The sound made her chest tighten. Instincts urged her to curl inward, to brace for something she couldn't name. William noticed her posture stiffen. He set the spoon down and spoke gently. You're inside now, he said. Roof solid. And I'm here. She swallowed hard. She wasn't used to reassurance. You don't know what storms were like where I was. He thought about that. No, he admitted. I don't. But this one won't hurt you. His straightforward tone grounded her more than sympathy would have. He didn't pity her. He simply told the truth. The rain intensified, drumming steadily across the boards. Naya's breath quickened for a moment, but then she looked at William again, standing by the stove, stirring the pot, completely unfazed. His calm bled into the room, and slowly her breathing settled. When the stew was ready, he filled 2 bowls and placed one in front of her. She held it carefully, letting the warmth seep through her hands. Eating beside someone without fear felt strange, unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. After they finished, William checked the window latch. If it leaks, tell me, he said. I can fix it. She nodded, tracing the rim of her bowl with one finger. Rain continued to strike the cabin, but the rhythm no longer sent her into panic. She wasn't chained outside. She wasn't waiting for someone to drag her out into the mud. She was sitting near a fire with a man who spoke plainly and expected nothing she wasn't ready to give. When thunder rolled again, she shifted her gaze toward the door. If you need help later, she said quietly, you can ask. William turned to her. I will. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe she might wake tomorrow and still be safe. The storm carried on outside, but inside the cabin the air held something steadier. 2 people learning how to exist beside each other without fear. The storm lasted longer than William expected. By the time evening settled across the hills, the rain had turned heavier, hitting the cabin roof with a steady force that drowned out distant sounds. The wind pushed against the boards hard enough that the lamps flickered whenever a strong gust passed. William checked each window again, making sure the latches held. He didn't trust old wood during weather like this. Naya sat close to the hearth, feeding small sticks into the fire so the flame wouldn't weaken. The crackling heat kept the room warm, but the storm's noise continued to pull her attention. Every sudden shift in wind made her straighten in her seat. She wasn't trembling openly, but William could see the strain in her posture. He finished inspecting the last window and set the bar across the door. "Roof's holding," he said. "We won't see leaks tonight." She nodded, but the reassurance didn't erase the memories storm stirred in her. For months, bad weather had meant being left outside, tied to a pole, or locked in a wagon where cold winds slipped through the cracks. Even now, sheltered and safe, her body didn't know how to forget. William noticed her breathing tighten each time thunder rolled. He pulled a second blanket from the trunk and placed it near her feet. "Use it if you get cold," he said, storms dropping the temperature. She didn't reach for it right away. She kept her arms wrapped around her knees, watching the flames climb and fall. The fire's movement steadied her more than the sound of his voice, but she appreciated the blanket's presence. Dinner had been simple, bread heated on the stove and the last of the stew from earlier, but neither of them had eaten much. The storm swallowed their appetite more than the food itself. When a loud crash of thunder hit directly above the cabin, Naya flinched so hard that the spoon she held slipped from her hand and clattered onto the floor. She froze, unsure how he would react. "It's fine," William said calmly. "Leave it." His even tone surprised her. She bent to pick it up anyway, keeping her movement small. William didn't move toward her or raise his voice. He simply continued adjusting the fire, as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Another gust shook the walls. Naya's breath shortened again. She looked at the door, then at the window, then back at him. "Storms don't end quickly in this place?" she asked. "Not always," he replied. "But this cabin's seen worse." She tried to take comfort in that, though her mind kept drifting to nights when she had no cabin, no fire, no blanket, only ropes and cold ground. William leaned against the table, watching her carefully. "You're safe here," he said. "Storm can't touch you." His voice was steady, not loud, but the certainty in it made her feel anchored in the moment rather than trapped in her memory. A sudden blast of wind pushed rain hard against the door, forcing it inward slightly. William stepped forward and braced it until the gust passed. Naya stood up immediately, heart hammering, convinced something outside was trying to get in. "It's just wind," he said without turning. "Nothing more." She stayed beside the hearth, gripping the edge of the table to keep her hands from shaking. When the wind eased, William let the door settle back into place. He grabbed a wooden wedge from the shelf and secured it under the bottom corner. "That'll hold it better." Naya swallowed hard. "Storms like this," she began but stopped. She wasn't sure she could speak without revealing too much. "You don't have to explain," he said, reading her expression clearly. "I understand enough." She looked at him more closely then, realizing he meant it. He didn't pry. He didn't push for stories she wasn't ready to revisit. The fire dimmed slightly, and the cabin cooled. William added 2 larger logs to keep the heat steady. The weather outside made it impossible to keep distance the same way they had before. "You'll sleep closer to the fire tonight," he said. "The wind is dropping the temperature faster than usual." She hesitated. "Where will you sleep?" "On the cot," he answered. "Same as before. I'll shift it nearer so you don't get the cold draft." He moved the cot a few feet to the left, placing it behind the table but still within warmth of the hearth. Naya pulled her blanket tighter around herself, rising slowly to position her bedding closer to the fire. When another thunderclap hit, she froze again, her chest tightening. William noticed the reaction and spoke gently. "Sit," he said. "Storm won't last all night." She lowered herself onto the blanket and tucked her knees under the fabric. He sat on the edge of the cot, elbows resting on his thighs, watching the fire instead of her. The room glowed with a soft orange light, shadows shifting across the wooden walls. Minutes passed without either of them speaking. The storm continued, But something about sharing the quiet changed the way it pressed against the cabin. Naya's breathing slowed. William's posture loosened. The distance between them remained, yet the silence felt different, less like a void and more like a space they were learning to share. When the fire popped loudly, she glanced at him. "Why do you live alone?" she asked. William didn't answer immediately. He kept his eyes on the flames. "I made choices years ago that cost me people I cared about," he said finally. "Living here keeps those choices from repeating." "You stay alone because you think you'll hurt someone?" she asked quietly. "I stay alone because I don't want to fail someone again," he corrected. Naya absorbed his words slowly. She had expected distance from him, but not honesty. She pulled the blanket closer, but her posture changed. For the first time, she wasn't only protecting herself, she was trying to understand him. Another thunder roll passed overhead, less forceful this time. Naya didn't flinch. William noticed and nodded slightly, satisfied she was finding calm again. When the fire settled into a low, even burn, he said, "Try to sleep." Storm's moving east now. She lay down with her back to the fire, comforted by the warmth behind her. William dimmed the lantern and stretched out on the cot. The storm still echoed outside, but its intensity no longer controlled her pulse. For the first time, she allowed herself to drift towards sleep while someone else remained awake in the same room. William watched the fire a moment longer, listening to her breath settle. He felt something shift inside him, small, steady, unavoidable. The storm continued outside, but inside the cabin the night grew quiet between them. The storm cleared by sunrise, leaving the ground damp and the air noticeably colder. A thin mist clung to the lower parts of the yard, drifting between the fence posts as if unsure whether to lift or settle. William stepped outside first, letting the door close gently behind him so the sound wouldn't alarm Naya. He scanned the sky, relieved to see a clean stretch of pale blue forming above the hills. Today would give them a chance to repair whatever yesterday's weather had loosened. Inside the cabin, Naya sat up slowly. She had slept deeper than she expected, waking without the jolt that usually followed nights filled with anxiety. The fire had burned low during the early hours, but enough warmth lingered to keep her comfortable. She folded her blanket neatly and stood, listening to the quiet outside. No shouting, no chains clanking, no footsteps approaching her with intention. Only the steady cluck of chickens and the faint creak of the barn door as the wind nudged it. She stepped outside, pulling the doorway blanket around her shoulders. William was at the trough, pumping water into a small bucket. His coat was already damp from mist, and his hair carried beads of moisture along the strands. He noticed her but didn't call her over, giving her time to adjust to the morning air. "You rested?" he asked once she approached on her own. "Yes," she answered, her voice clearer than the day before. He nodded once. Storm didn't do much damage. Fence near the pigs needs tightening. Roof on the coop lifted in one corner. Nothing serious. Naya looked around, scanning for broken boards or fallen branches. She had never seen a property after a storm where people didn't argue over lost supplies or shout orders at her. Instead, the ranch looked calm, waiting for the day to begin. "I can help," she said. William studied her expression. She wasn't offering out of fear. She was offering because she wanted to contribute. "Then we work slow," he said. "No need to rush." He handed her a small basket and pointed toward the yard. "Pick up loose branches. Anything thicker than your wrist goes in the woodpile." She nodded, gripping the basket with growing confidence. As she walked the yard, she noticed details she hadn't allowed herself to observe before. The pattern of hoof prints near the fence, the soft mud absorbing her footsteps, the neat rows of chopped wood stacked onto the shed roof. This ranch held order, not chaos. William tightened the fence line while she gathered branches. He kept glancing in her direction, not out of distrust, but to ensure she wasn't overwhelmed by the workload. She moved steadily, crouching to lift fallen debris with careful hands. When the basket grew heavy, she carried it toward the shed without being asked. After an hour, William approached, brushing dirt from his palms. "Coop roof next," he said. "I'll hammer the boards. You hold the planks steady." Naya followed him around the side of the coop. The wind from the storm had pried a section of the roof upward. William moved the ladder into place, pressed his boot against the lower rung, and climbed. She held the plank firmly, her fingers gripping its rough edges. When the hammer struck, she prepared herself for the sound. It startled her, but she didn't jump this time. "You're holding it right," he said without looking down. "Don't let go until I say." The board settled back into place. William climbed down and checked the remaining edges. "That should last through winter," he said. As they walked back toward the cabin, Naya asked, "Is there always this much work here?" "There's always something," he answered. "Living alone doesn't lighten the load." She absorbed that quietly, realizing how much he handled without complaint. She wondered if the loneliness he carried weighed more than the tasks themselves. He fetched 2 tin cups and poured water from the bucket he filled earlier. Naya took hers with cautious gratitude, sipping slowly. The cold water steadied her after the work. "I didn't expect to stay here long," she said after a moment. "I thought you might send me out at sunrise." William set his cup on the railing. "I don't hand someone a danger after pulling them from it." Her throat tightened. "Most men don't think that way." "I'm not most men," he replied simply. The wind shifted, brushing her hair across her face. She tucked it behind her ear, uncertain how to respond. She had known men who either demanded obedience or used kindness as a trap. William fit neither pattern. "Inside," he said after a moment. "We'll eat something warm." They returned to the cabin. William placed a pan on the stove and cracked eggs into it, adding leftover potatoes from the night before. The scent filled the room. Naya sat at the table, watching the way he cooked. Minimal movements, careful portioning, no wasted motions. "You lived alone how long?" she asked quietly. 8 years, he said. "Long enough to get used to silence." "Do you prefer it?" He paused, considering the honest answer. "Silence doesn't argue," he said, "but it doesn't answer back either." She looked down at her hands. "I don't know what I prefer anymore." "You'll figure it out," he said. "There's no hurry." After they ate, he handed her a small cloth. "Wipe the table. Then you can rest if you want." She cleaned the table carefully, paying attention to each corner. When she finished, she stepped toward the door, watching the yard again. For the first time, she felt a faint pull toward the quiet rather than fear of it. William noticed her lingering. "Something on your mind?" She hesitated, then answered honestly. "I don't feel trapped today." He studied her calmly. "Good. That's how it should be." The simplicity of his reply struck her harder than he knew. She didn't thank him, not out of ingratitude, but because the words felt too heavy for her to speak yet. Instead, she nodded once and let the warmth of the fire reach her before stepping back outside to breathe air that didn't carry the weight of chains. The morning settled into a calm rhythm as the storm's remnants evaporated under the rising sun. Damp earth released a fresh scent across the yard, and the chickens resumed their usual scratching near the fence. William tightened the saddle on his horse, preparing for a short ride into the lower pasture to check for storm damage. He glanced toward the cabin window, noticing Naya watching quietly from inside. He stepped to the doorframe and spoke gently. "I'll be gone an hour. Fence line down by the creek needs a look." Naya stepped forward, her hands clasped together in a controlled manner. "I'm coming." William paused. She hadn't ventured far from the cabin until now, and the request surprised him, but it was the kind of surprise that showed progress. "It's a long walk," he warned. "Ground still soft from the rain." "I can manage," she replied, meeting his eyes without wavering. He nodded, adjusting his pace to match her stride as they crossed the yard. Naya kept close, but not in fear, more in caution, testing the boundaries of the world beyond the cabin. The lower pasture stretched into open land marked by tall grass and scattered rocks. The creek ran swollen from the storm, its steady movement louder than usual. As they approached the damaged section of fence, Naya took in the landscape. This was the farthest she had walked since her rescue. The openness unsettled her at first, but William's steady presence kept her grounded. He pointed at the broken rail hanging crookedly over the mud. "Storm pushed this loose," he said. "We'll need to reset it." "How do I help?" she asked. William raised a brow slightly. She had always waited for instruction before, but now she asked willingly. Hold the rail steady while I hammer, he said. Keep it level. She stepped into position, gripping the rail firmly. Her arms trembled from the effort, but she didn't shift away. William hammered each nail with careful, precise strikes. The sound echoed across the pasture, but she didn't flinch the way she did earlier in the week. She watched him work, recognizing how his strength came not from force, but from discipline. When the last nail was driven in, he stepped back. Good, he said. That'll hold. Naya lowered her hands, wiping mud from her fingers on her dress. I thought you might ask me to stay at the cabin. You said you could manage, he replied. I believed you. His trust startled her more than his hammering did. She wasn't used to a man accepting her words without suspicion or doubt. They walked along the pasture edge, examining the remaining fence posts. Naya felt the sun warming her back and heard the soft rustle of grass beneath their footsteps. For a moment, the world didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a place she was allowed to stand. When they reached the creek, she knelt to touch the water. It was cold, running fast over smooth stones. William watched her from a short distance, noticing how carefully she studied her surroundings. She didn't look lost. She looked aware, taking in a world she thought she had been severed from forever. You live near water? He asked. Yes, she answered. But not like this. Not so open. He nodded, understanding that open land could feel both freeing and frightening. After a quiet moment, she said, When a storm came last night, I thought I would run, even though there was nowhere to go. I stayed because you didn't shout. You didn't rush me. I'm not here to chase you, he said. If you walk away one day, it'll be your choice. Her breathing changed slightly. Not fear, something closer to uncertainty mixed with relief. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she watched the creek, listening to the water move around a fallen branch. They began to walk back toward the ranch. William kept his steps steady, letting her choose her distance. Sometimes she walked beside him, sometimes a few paces behind, measuring the space as if mapping out safety. Halfway across the yard, she spoke again. Do you want me to leave? He stopped walking. If I wanted that, you would know. She studied his face. Then why did you take me from the yard? You didn't need me here. That's true, he said quietly. But needing someone and wanting them safe aren't the same thing. His words lingered between them. She looked at the cabin, the place where she had slept without chains for the first time in months. Her voice lowered. I don't know where I belong now. You don't have to decide today, he said. Decisions made in fear don't hold. They reached the cabin again. The sunlight brightened the doorway, warming the wood. Naya paused before stepping inside. I don't want to leave, she said. The statement surprised even her. She expected fear to pull her backward, yet something about this place, about him, kept her grounded. William didn't react outwardly. He didn't smile or show relief. He simply nodded as if the decision belonged entirely to her, and it did. If you're staying, he said, then you should know you're not a burden here. Her throat tightened with emotion. She couldn't speak. Instead, she stepped past him and entered the cabin, stopping near the hearth as if reclaiming the space as her own. William followed and set his tools aside. The fire crackled softly. The air felt different, more certain, more settled. Naya glanced over her shoulder at him. For the first time, she didn't look like someone waiting for permission. She looked like someone choosing a home. The next morning arrived with a clear sky and a quiet breeze sweeping across the ranch, carrying the smell of dry grass and soil warming under the sun. William stepped onto the porch with his coat slung over his shoulder, ready to start another day of chores. He paused when he saw Naya standing near the fence line, her hair catching the light as she inspected the chickens moving across the yard. She had risen earlier than usual, already gathering scattered feathers into the small basket she used before. Her movements no longer held the frantic caution of the first day. They were measured and steady, shaped by a growing sense of belonging she hadn't allowed herself to feel until now. William approached slowly. You're up early. I wanted to help, she said, turning toward him. I know the animals better now. You do, he agreed, and they're calmer with you around. A hint of warmth crossed her expression, subtle but undeniable. She set the basket on the porch and waited for him to speak again, but William didn't push conversation. Instead, he studied the way she stood, feet firmly planted, shoulders relaxed, breathing even. She looked like a person building a life, not a woman clinging to survival. "I'm heading to the north pasture," he said. "Check that the storm didn't loosen the gate. You can come if you want." She didn't hesitate. "I'll come." They walked side by side toward the far edge of the property. The grass brushed against their boots, and Naya breathed in the crisp air, grateful for the silence that wasn't heavy or threatening. William pointed out tracks along the ground, small hoof prints belonging to deer, deeper ones from wandering cattle, and the faint marks of rabbits. "You notice everything," she said. "You learn fast living alone," he answered. "The land tells you things before people do." Naya considered that. She understood how the land could become a companion when no one else remained. When they reached the pasture gate, she saw that the latch had loosened again from yesterday's wind. William tightened the bolts with a wrench he carried in his coat. She held the gate steady without being asked, cooperating with a quiet ease that neither of them had expected at the beginning of their time together. "You work well with your hands," he said as he finished tightening the last bolt. "I had to," she said. "Not always by choice." "Still," he replied, "you learn quickly." They walked back toward the cabin, the sun warming the ground beneath them. Naya felt a calmness she had never associated with open land. The fear that once gripped her at the sight of wide spaces had softened, replaced by something steadier, familiarity mixed with trust. When they reached the porch, William paused. He set his tools down and faced her fully, his expression serious but not heavy. "There's something you should know," he said. "You're not here because I expect anything from you. You're here because you chose to stay yesterday." Naya listened carefully, unsure where the conversation was headed, but sensing its importance. "I won't keep anyone who wants to leave," he continued. "But I also won't let someone think they have no place when they do." She tightened her grip on the porch railing. "Do you want me here?" William didn't hesitate. "Yes." The word was simple, but it carried weight she hadn't felt in years. She looked down briefly, steadying herself before meeting his gaze again. "I don't want to leave," she said. "Not now. Maybe not ever." A slow breath left William's chest. Not relief exactly, but something close. A release of tension he hadn't realized he was holding. "Then we build something here," he said. "Not all at once. Not rushed, but steady." Naya stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking without either of them forcing it. She studied his face, trying to understand the man who had pulled her from a place where her life meant nothing and given her room to become herself again. "You saved me," she said. "I gave you a way out," he corrected gently. "You save yourself by walking toward the wagon." She held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded, accepting the truth in his words. Inside the cabin, William lit a small fire to warm the chilly morning air. Naya moved beside him, placing a pot of water near the flame. Their movements aligned in a natural rhythm, each anticipating the other without discussion. After breakfast, William opened the trunk at the foot of his cot and removed a small piece of cloth wrapped around something solid. He unfolded it carefully, revealing a simple leather bracelet he had crafted years ago. The stitching was imperfect, the surface worn, but the intention behind it had always been sincere. "This was meant for someone once," he said. "I never gave it. Never felt the time was right." Naya looked at the bracelet, then at him. "Why show it to me?" "Because now the time feels right," he said quietly. "If you stay here, it's as family, not as someone owned or someone owed. I want that clear." Her heartbeat quickened, not with fear, but with something she couldn't define yet. She held out her wrist slowly, giving him her answer without words. William fastened the bracelet with careful hands, making sure it fit comfortably. Naya looked at it for a long moment, her expression steady and full. "This means I belong here?" she asked. "It means you choose this place," he said, "and I choose it with you." The cabin felt warmer than the fire could explain. The air between them held a certainty that hadn't existed before. Naya stepped closer, resting her hand gently on his arm. "I stay," she whispered. "With you." William didn't move for a second, absorbing the meaning of her words. Then he nodded once, a quiet acceptance of a life no longer lived alone. By midday, they were working together again, feeding animals, repairing a bucket handle, gathering straw for the coop. Nothing dramatic happened. No threats, no storms, no danger. Just two people moving through the day with a shared understanding. For Naya, the ranch no longer felt like a temporary shelter. It felt like beginning again. For William, the isolation he had used as protection finally loosened, replaced by something he had long believed he didn't deserve. A home that didn't echo with silence. And as the sun dipped behind the hills, leaving warm light across the cabin doorway, the life they had built, quiet, steady, chosen, stood on ground far stronger than either had expected. They had found not just safety, but each other. A future settled, certain, and theirs.